Hello humans. Hello humans. Big storm here. So over the last few days we've experienced the majesty, the fierceness, the assault of the weather, and seen it transform our area around us. And transformation is a key theme for humans constantly throughout all of our lives. We seek to transform ourselves into something we are not, almost moment by moment. And it is a often undiscussed but primal aspect of being human and being alive, is this idea of transformation. And we take transformation and originally we think of it as magic, okay? So as I discussed in the buttermilk woo, you have fermentation, which is true transformation of these primal elements and making something different, and it produces a transformation within the human when the human consumes the product of that fermentation, whether it's sauerkraut or whether it's alcohol, whether it's wine or whatever, right? Because that even the sauerkraut can transform you because of its effect on your gut. So if you're in the midst of an illness affecting your gut and you get some fermented foods in you, then you are transformed by that fermentation and you feel better. And you recognize this. You have a body-mind sensorial response to that ingestation that is magical in the sense that it transforms you from ill to well. Okay, so humans recognize this, we understand this, and we at some point discover transformational experience, and we seek it pretty much the rest of our lives, right? So you get your chaga coffee, you get a little caffeine in there. The caffeine is a little bit of a drug, and it transforms you from your otherwise sluggish, oh my God, the storm's beating down on me, to, and then you get on nice and bright and happy, and you go off and you do stuff. So all these things are transformational. We transform ourselves through our sensory apparatus, okay? And so I used to be under the impression that we only had those sensory apparati that are within the cranium, all right? So those would be restricted to the eyes, ears, nose, and the sensory apparatus in the mouth, as well as the pineal gland. Now, scientists have discovered sensory subsets. So the reason that I never thought touch was a true sense was that there was no sense organ identified for touch. And thus it was just part of the impressions that universe left on the body. However, now we have identified these two things that they call P1 and T1, right? The T1 is the touch sensor that's all throughout our bodies, and the P1 is the temperature sensor that's all throughout our bodies. They seem to be interconnected. They seem to be intertied. This is a recent discovery. These scientists have been working on it. It's been validated. There are a lot of these critters throughout our entire body. They are not ubiquitously spread. They're not evenly spread through the body. They cluster. So we do have areas where we know it's excruciatingly painful to have a small hit, right? And so we now know that we have an inordinate number of these touch sensors right at these spots. And apparently they can get overloaded and trigger from touch and trigger pain. Trigger a pain sensation. So now we're starting to understand some of this. So now we know that we've got 7 senses, and that we also know that the temperature one, according to the way that they've discovered and some of the stuff that has been discovered about it, the temperature one may be able to be, no, it is presumed to be able to be activated by some other mechanisms. So this brings up the idea that it might be radiative. In other words, the little tiny P1s that are temperature sensors that are spread throughout your hands and cluster up on the fingertips and this kind of thing, but not as much clustered there in your fingers as they are in other parts of the body. So we have parts of our body that are less temperature sensitive. These things are potentially able to be triggered by electromagnetic radiation, by radiative kinds of things other than temperature. So this is a really tricky one that they discovered. So the touch one is kind of like those little pressure sensor things that you used to step on in order to activate automatic door as you would go into. They may still exist in many places, but they took them out for a lot of different reasons. But you used to be able to go on into an automatic door that would open up, and it would open up because you stepped on this big rubber pad that was out in the sticking out in front of it. And it was, always about the distance of the door and maybe 6 feet. You'd step on these things and the door would open. That was just a up-down pressure sensitive kind of a thing. It was triggered a solenoid and the door would, magnetic field was thrown and the door would open. Our touch sensors are very much like that, insofar as they're able to see or to hypothesize through this computer modeling, now that they've been able to discover them and validate them, right? But the temperature ones appear to be open in the sense that they know that they react to temperature. They don't know how, but they know that they do. And they're reacting to temperature at various distances from the actual sensor. Again, they don't know how that's done, but it is done. But it also appears that the way the thing is constructed, that there's more avenues for it to react to other kinds of things. So this is kind of cool to discover these things now. So we can go back and we can revise Thinking in Destiny and go back through there, because it was unknown at the time that he wrote that these things actually exist. But we now know they're complete subsystems, just like in your head. And we also now know that the connections to the nervous system would validate the idea of the NADI, the NADI concept from yoga, from acupuncture, this kind of thing, right? That there's 70,000+ of these little connections that all bind all of your nerves and basically bring them up in a big cluster into your sensory apparatus in your head. And it appears that these the pressure and the temperature sensors are bound to the that setup of nerve interconnections. And thus it now makes sense that you could do an acupuncture needle somewhere and trigger a sensation in the finger, perhaps of heat or cold or somebody touching it, right? Because you're actually you're back feeding down the nerve to the sensor itself. This also explains even things like phantom limb syndrome, because the nadi, the connections up here, are used to receiving these signals, and something is triggering them right there. Your body is used to interpreting those signals right there as your hand moving, so if you've lost your hand, you would nonetheless still feel as though your hand was moving. This was really interesting, because a guy I know who's trying to do some work with people that have prosthetics and have issues with phantom limb syndrome. So I've been talking to him about some of this stuff, and thus actually this whole deal here. Anyway, so now we know. We have 7 sensory apparati. All right, so we transform ourselves. We transform ourselves through these 7 sensory apparati. This transformational process is sought. It's deliberately sought. It's unconsciously sought. It's continuously sought. We always want to have this transformational process. We are driven to it. This accounts for addictions and all of this kind of stuff as well, and aberrant behavior, and any of these things can get sliced off, and you can get fixated, and your mind can go, truly like a squirrel, like on a spinning in on something, and to the exclusion of everything else, and we get into these warped states, right? Again, transformational, although not necessarily the way we want. So when we transform ourselves through our sensory subsets, let me do that. Through our subsets, we use these critters right here. Not so much pineal, by the way. Notice that they always do everything in our social order, the powers that be, to calcify your pineal gland and remove intuition from your grasp. But anyway, so we take these 7 sensory subsets and we warp them. We do something to them in order to transform ourselves, to feel the magic. And so we sometimes we discover that we can do it through deprivation. This would be like the sweat lodges. This would be like extreme fasting. This would be like the whirling dervish, where they just spin and spin and spin and spin until basically you're depriving your body of something to the point where it disturbs your consciousness, and you are transformed, and it is a magical process. And you'll see deprivation, and you'll also see, everybody's transformed by disease. When you get a fierce case of the flu or something like that, you end up, I'm going to turn this, hang on a second. There we go. You end up getting a little bit loopy as the fever burns the flu out, and you get the elevated temperature, and it brought up another thought. Anyway, and that to burn out the flu, and the disease itself will distort your consciousness, and things can get strange, and the veil parts and so on, right? Okay, so you can do it through distress. If you've ever had been around people dying, that's just enough said about that. So all of these are transformational. All of these things here will impact you, and there are many different ways of getting at it here. So, but as we get into like drugs, toxins, and pheromones, and chords, and even to a certain extent meditation, and you can even put in there things like foods. So chords, music, foods. And so we see that all of these things, all of these guys here, are attempting to do direct manipulation of one of the sensory subsets. Alcohol, not so much a sensory apparatus. You want to get it in, and then you feel the effect of it. But all of these guys work through our sensory apparatus to control or alter our consciousness, basically on an ingestion process. So we ingest music, so to speak. We willingly, if you're a chordophile, right? If you're someone who feels your vibration, so I'm describing a musician is someone who is actually lives in the vibration of the chords, and it is so extensive within them that they must get it out, right? So that's why I put this as being primal, because you can chord humans. A chord is a kind of a resonant frequency among various different, sometimes very disparate elements. And so, but it's very powerful. And so networks are chords in this concept, right? You can have a chording effect in foods. And so you can actually tie, so if you have people that are foodies, and okay, so you could have a situation where you could have a lot of people that are really into food, and let's say they're really into chocolate, which is a drug itself, but let's leave the drug part of chocolate outside of it and just go into the mouthfeel part of it, right? These people within this little group of foodies, maybe they follow some of the people on YouTube, and they go out and they make one of these 100-hour chocolate cakes, right? And so this would be a cake that has so many different kinds of chocolate and so many different processes. You know, it's various different kinds of processes to extract the flavors, and they put it in the refrigerator for a day and all this other stuff. It takes 100 hours to make this chocolate cake. And so you get these 6 people around there, and they chop the chocolate cake up, and as an outside observer, we're watching them. Now, each and every one of them will be chorded to the flavors that are within that cake. They will respond. They've already trained their body, as a foodie, they've trained their body to react in pleasure and give them dopamine and repress serotonin, repress cortisol. They get really mellow, and then they actually allow the theobromine in the chocolate to not theobromine, I'll think of it in a minute, the drug in the chocolate to take them over, right? But prior to that, it is an entirely an entrained, chorded response within their mouth that floods their body through, and they'll even get temperature changes within their body from intense food appreciation. So they are individually chorded. But if you get a bunch of foodies together that all share this same thing, they will chord and they will amplify. So it's like the same effect of going to a big concert, going to a soccer game with all of your buddies. You all root for the same team. Everybody's energy gets pumped up. That's a chording process. You can do that nationally with, like Hitler getting everybody with long speeches, all of that kind of stuff, getting everybody roused up into a particular pitch, vibrating on a particular kind of a frequency. So this works as a transformational process, not only individually, but in groups. And in fact, it is what people desire to do as managers. They want to chord their organization, get everyone in their organization all worked up on the same thing, such that disharmony, again, a musical kind of a reference, disappears, so that we're all vibrating at the same thing and we get all the work done with the minimal number of errors, etc., and the minimal number of headaches and hassle for the supervisor, which is always the ultimate goal of work. I mean, they don't really care about the output. They just don't want anybody to come. They don't want any shit to fall on them, right? Anyway, so here we are. All of these things are transformational. As we know, you can transform yourself individually, you can transform yourself at various different levels. We're in the process right now of going through a major transformation globally. Now, I believe, it is my understanding, that we're going through this transformation, that it was triggered by these strange energies from space. Let me also point out, before we move on a bit, that meditation is a very unique form of transformation. On so many different levels, because it is an exactitude of deprivation of all of the sensory subsets, such that consciousness disconnects or no longer puts energy into the interface between itself and the subsets, which work on their own. They're just going to continue to work. So you're still hearing stuff even though you're asleep or knocked out, right? It's just that your consciousness is no longer connected to it when you're asleep. So, and in fact, it can wake you up because of that abrupt connection when something happens and comes over the threshold that you've individually set in your body as to what will freak you out when you're sleeping, right? Some people have a low threshold. Some people have a very deep one. So if you ever go into any group kind of situation, like in the army or something, right, you discover very rapidly that some people are extremely light sleepers. A mouse can wake them up. Other people, it's like, you can clomp through there with your boots and nothing's going to wake these guys up, right? They have a higher threshold for that connection between the auditory and consciousness. Meditation is an attempt to directly deprive yourself from that. Now, Zazen, the type of meditation that was most successful for me, involved, I didn't know it, T1 sensors in the form of sitting seiza and the divorcing of the consciousness from the body, because you've got to go through this pain process each and every time. It is transformational in that sense. Transformation usually involves some level of body discomfort, whether that discomfort, and by that I mean a change in state, is pleasurable or not, is immaterial. It discomforts, so transformation removes the old state of the body and the being and changes it into a new one. There are types of meditation that specifically focus in on distress and all of these kinds of things. It's not necessary that we go there to achieve the appropriate effects from meditation. All right, so as all of these are transformational, it is possible to understand that all transformations are magnified and have an analog in the initiation process. So the goal of any initiation process is to transform you, is to change you. There is a deliberate reason that we have the X, and we can say X formation, or that we use X as a substitute for trans in our modern social order. And this relates to much of the symbology of the powers that be and how they're trying to manage things at the moment. So we will note, all right, so it was my conclusion that the strange energies from space that we were going to encounter in 2019, very into 2019, that would persist for at least 18 or 19 months, which so far they haven't. I think they've let up, but we may be into a lull as opposed to a dilution or a diminishing of them. We may just be in a slight dip and then come back into them. It's hard for us to be able to anticipate this, but it appears that some of these strange energies have backed off a bit. However wacky the planet is, it's because we've absorbed all of this. Anyway, so in my thinking, the transformational process of humanity has been started. Now, we can say that this was a deliberate act of consciousness to cause all of us as humans to go through this process, and that we all incarnated here now because this was going to happen. And when we incarnated, we knew we were incarnating to be here now because it is happening, while it is happening, to experience it happening and to be experienced by it happening. And that's quite valid. Those views are all quite valid. Most normies wouldn't give them any credence at all and would just, I don't understand any of that, let's go on. Okay, so will, as in I will this to be true, or I will do this, aside, the will aside, we're here at the point of transformation. The transformation of our social order can't be denied. And it is my conclusion that the powers that be are attempting to harmonize on this generalized upheaval within humanity. Now, I don't think that was what motivated them. It could have been. How they would know that this was going to happen now as opposed to 2050. They had originally had a 2050 timeline for all this bullshit we're going through now. And it kept coming forward until now we're experiencing all this bullshit all jammed into a short period of time. And they actually had started they had this plan for 2050, and if you rack it all the way back, they initiated it basically in the year 2000. And they kept bringing forward parts of it until it was all clustered here around the time we're in now, 2021. It may be that they have some mechanism of knowing that there were going to be transformational energies now, and that their original plan had pegged those transformational energies in 2050, and they had to move it forward because those energies could not have been timed at an exactitude when the plan was created, and they now were a bit more skilled in seeing these energies, and were able to anticipate that they would be here now, because the energies are clearly here now. The transformation of the planet itself, beyond any electromagnetic fucking around by humans, is way on, as is the effects of the sun, the grand solar minimum, all of that kind of stuff. So they, the powers that be may be harmonizing. They may be attempting to harmonize deliberately with the transformational energies. So now here's something in the martial arts. It's a good way to think about it. If I'm going to fight somebody, I'm a reasonably small guy, right? I'm 170 pounds. If I'm going to fight somebody that's one of these big people that you see walking around that, you know, could be a bouncer or a security guy, or, you know, that kind of thing. Or even if I'm going to go to fight somebody that's a big slobby guy that's been sitting on the couch all day slugging beer and, you know, and eating Cheetos until he's 330 pounds, right? Mass counts in a fight. And so as a smaller fellow, it is advantageous for me to do things to get that opponent to charge me. The reason that is that I will find it, especially as an older man, easier to move mass once it's already in motion on its own. It's much easier to deflect and push 300 pounds of mass that's charging at you than to get it moving and push it away. So I couldn't rush up to a 300-pound man and count on the ability to lift him up and throw him away. But if he's charging at me, and I put the appropriate amount of push into it at the appropriate time with the appropriate angle, I could probably fling him 30 feet or 10 feet, depending on how fast he's moving, right? How much he's really getting into it. So this is what I think that the powers that be were doing, is that maybe they were, this bugs me, by the way, probably you figured this out, is I want to know the why. I want to know their motivation on why they shifted this shit forward. But one of the things here is that I think that they are attempting to harmonize with these waves of change that are getting us all, waves of cosmic energy that are getting us all whipped up anyway. And so they may have figured once we were all up and agitated, then it would be easier to shift us all into this great reset. Or, you know, there's also coincidentally the petrodollar is dying and all of the fiat currencies are dying, and so they know that their game's up and they're going to be exposed. In any event, so there's deep woo out here though, guys. In this transformational process, you come across really strange ideas that make no sense at all, and you kind of, you know, I mean, you can, well, wait a second. They do make sense on many different levels, but the whole overall thing doesn't make sense. So, so magic at all levels is an attempt to transform humans individually. Having a beer is a magical act, right? You're going to transform yourself from pre to post beer state, or drink or whatever, right? So you attempt to do this all the time. People are attempting to do it to our social order, and some individuals, seemingly working in groups, seemingly corded around some kind of a theme, are seemingly working to transform our social order to some direction that it would not otherwise take, and we can't ascertain why. We can always speculate and put motivation on them, but we don't really have any real understanding of why that is. So let me, all right, so right in the moment, it can't be denied that we're under the assault, that the social order is under the assault of this critical race theory now called social emotional learning cell or something. We got to sell this to you, as opposed to, you know, the CRT part of it. But anyway, so we're under assault by that. We're also under assault by the transformation in gender. And you notice that Biden, you know, he can't get Americans out of Afghanistan. He can't fix the border. He can't fix the economy. They can't fix the judicial system. They don't want to do any of that. They want to destroy the society, so that's why they're not doing any of it. But nonetheless, the rationale is they can't do any of that. But by God, we've got a gender policy here for the United States for the next 100 years in compliance with the United Nations. It's like, wait a second, you know, things are getting really goofy here in the transformational process that the powers that be are trying to engineer is coming out into the open everywhere. And so we see that they're focusing on all these weird kind of things, right? And Putin, the head of Russia, is correct that Wokianism is just a slightly redirected form of Bolshevik bullshit. And it destroyed Russia and caused the Soviet Union to be created, and he's thinking it's going to destroy the West, and he's going to concerned because he's got real problems if we get wonky and get all destroyed. Okay, so he's correct about that. Now, all this shit ties together because we find that there is this fixation by the powers that be now and all of their minions in the power structure on gender, and to some extent on sex, as in the actual physical sex of the person. And they've separated the two, right? And they're keeping off on this separation of gender, and they've got plans for it and so on. They put so much energy into it that it is obviously, this is definitively a key thing to them. And you can ask many questions about this. Why, who, all of these different kinds of questions as to why they're doing this, who's promulgating this. It all keeps coming back to the individual why on all of these people, but we know that they're key on changing gender because that transforms all of humanity. It is across all of human subdivisions in terms of geopolitical, religious, all of these things. Everybody has to deal with gender. And so we see this assault on gender in all the societies. even in the Islamic societies, and that's starting to cause them real problems. But nonetheless, the powers that be are just hammering on this. Now, the powers that be are saying that there's this thing that they call transgender, which I dispute. Okay, they're saying a trans person is someone who would be a male born in a female body, or a female born in a male body. And then they also have all of this idea of ambivalence and, you know, non-binary and all this kind of stuff, right? All these cool buzzwords. But here's some thinking about this that I think needs to be understood. This is a transformational process to transform our social order at a very deep level from which it may not recover, probably would not recover. And so I see this as a great weapon in the hands of the bug, regardless of how the powers that be think about it or what their individual goals are for it. They're being manipulated to push this out on humans. Now, in an appropriate understanding, or a more, well, I don't want to say appropriate, in another understanding of humans, we have 7 different minds. Now that I know that we've got 7 subsets, that makes sense, okay? We've got the thinker, the knower, we've got the doer in the body, and then we've got our reason and our rationality, okay? And these are all individual minds insofar as we describe and understand a mind. Now, we note here that the reason and rationality are set aside from the other minds, and that the doer is divided into 12 segments. And the doer, in terms of minds, is a composite tuple being, a triune being. And this triuneness, this idea of 3 bound together as one, is replicated throughout the whole thing as the dominant design pattern. And so we'll see it replicated again and again. So we have our main human non-corporeal construct is the knower, the thinker, and the doer in the body. That's our main construct. And so that's a tuple being here, right? A triune being. This doer in the body is itself split up into body-mind and desire-mind and feeling-mind. And this feeling is not the sensation of touch, it is feeling emotions, responding to emotions. And so feeling mind is mostly feminine, desire mind is mostly masculine. In other words, men are mostly in the desire mind dominant, and women are mostly in feeling mind dominant states. And the body mind is dominant, like when you slam your hand in a car door. You know, you don't think desire, you don't think feeling, all you think is pain, and your body, you're right there in the body. So the body mind is the automatic system that keeps us going. All right, so the doer is sliced in reality into, and we are all doers in the body, okay? But we're only, and this is why 12 is important, we're only 1/12 of a doer. And so there are female, male, female, male, female, male, female, male, female, male, female, male. Okay, so this is why 12 is important. This is why there's 12 elements to a zodiac, because we replicate all this shit into our observable materium. We project out all of these as above, so below design patterns into the materium that are actually part of us in our deeper sense, right? And so the powers that be would tell you that nature is broken. Universe is broken. The materium is broken. And they know this because that person over there who's in a physical male body shouldn't be. and they're telling you this. This should not have happened. This is broken. This is a bunch of damaged nature. Nature fucked up, and that person over there born in a male body should not have been born in a male body and should have been born in a female body. And it's like, wait a second. So nature fucked up, and so can I presume the sun won't have the earth dragged behind it, that tomorrow we won't have the sun, that the moon will start melting, that, you know, any other examples of nature fucking up, of nature suddenly changing, of nature doing things, you know, badly this way? Humans, I can understand getting weird-ass ideas and doing all kinds of strange things, but nature at a large level, nature writ large, ultimately large, fucking up, you know, I don't see the planets reversing and heading back in space, and I don't see water floating up into the sky, so I don't see a lot of other supporting evidence, physical evidence, for the assertion that nature fucked up and one individual born in a male body should not be male or female. Doesn't make any difference, right? Now, I know from my understanding of the human being and having been dead, and by the way, when you're dead, you get, I did, I don't know whether everybody does, but when I died, I saw three spheres, three large spheres, right? So I saw the knower and the knower and the thinker, and all the other parts of the doer. The doer was all these 11 little spheres that were all clustered together and merged into one, and I floated up out of the body and joined it, and it's all little spheres. Once you're out of your body, there's no point in maintaining its shape. So you'll see images on, especially mostly in religious literature, where the guy's dead and his body image floats up off of the corpse that's lying there, the physical matter, and heads towards the ceiling, right? It doesn't happen that way, because once you leave your body, consciousness is not going to express something that looked like the body. You don't care about the body. When I was dead, I could not have cared. I said to myself as I'm floating on up, well, that's useless. The body's already dead. No point in doing all that shit. They were cutting me open and doing things, right? Anyway, so you are, so I assert the universe is not broken, and I assert that transgender is a misunderstanding of the perception of issues of body dysphoria or whatever, but it's a misunderstanding of what's going on with an individual that's being amplified by an out-of-control psychiatric and medical system, right? And that medical system is systemic. The system has been turned against the people that formerly were the customers of the system, and now they are they're being consumed by the system, destroyed by the system. And this is part of how the bug works. The bug has this idea that it needs to get rid of humans and that all humans should be transformed. I mean, I know this, the bug makes this statement that we will be transformed and we will all know our place and we will be happy. And so this is this kind of like that Klaus Schwab shit. You know, you'll own nothing, you'll rent everything, and we'll tell you what to do and you'll be happy, right? It's like, no, that's a bunch of bug crap. But in any event, so we're in the midst of a transformational process. Universe kicked our ass and made us get up and start moving and running. And the powers that be are trying to turn the herd as we're running into their weird, twisted understanding of universe being broken and that gender is not associated with sex. Now, I know that this process means that I personally am one of these guys right here. That's my I, okay? And when I die, next up, an I that will feel like me will be born feminine, okay? I won't feel that feminine life. I won't experience that feminine life, but there will be a commonality to that feminine life that is shared here in the entirety of the doer. So that the next time I am born, which might be, you know, we got to go around this whole wheel again, so we got to go around all 12 segments there. So the other 11 will be born, and however long they live in their lives determines how long it will be before I next am alive, plus the amount of time that it is necessary for me to be in my rest period, in my sleep, the great sleep. in order to be recharged to come back again, right? It's a very energetic process, and you got to get pumped up for it, so to speak, by a good rest before you head back. But anyway, so this I-ness, this feeling of I, will be held by all of the 12 that are part of me, the doer, or part of the doer that I am also part of. And that doer is part of a triune being with a thinker and a knower. And so when we say here in the Materium, oh, I'm talking to spirit, or I think that my higher self is saying something to me, or universe provides and guides, whatever these sayings are, you're basically talking about the thinker and the knower. So the knower knows shit, right? The knower's in charge of the pineal gland and the intuition. The knower collects all the intuition, collects all the knowledge of all of your lives, and holds it all, and allows you to, and processes this, sort of like your database in a sense of all experience, and it processes it by giving it to the thinker, and the thinker puts things into you through the knower, who does so through intuition. And so it's good to not ignore intuition. It's good to get your pineal gland decalcified through all these various different means, but don't stress on it. It's not like you can really reach into it. The pineal gland, by the way, starts off when you're a fetus and you're growing your body, it starts off in the upper palate, just like the eyes, and is in fact a photoreceptor. So your pineal gland is an eye that looks inside you, that receives receptivity. It receives photons that are not coming in from outside, that are biologically generated inside your cranium in order to trigger responses in the pineal gland and introduce intuition into your thinking of that moment. That's how it happens. That's why you get those flashes of insight. They are flashes inside your pineal gland. It triggers this response, and there you go, right? Okay, so reason and rationality, by the way, are two subset minds that are in essence filters or controlling. If you were a programmer, you'd think of them as controlling filters or full stack protocol massagers, that putting things in order for the thinker and the knower. So it's involved in this process. So even these three this way form another triune being. So there's just this replication of process on three continuously in our Materium. And you can harmonize with that. I know that people do. I know one guy who's a fairly successful poker player, and he does things intuitively and mathematically inside, and I noticed that he's got this real fixation on three. He does it. If he wins three big hands, he backs off, that kind of thing, So anyway, so the powers that be are trying to transform us, and they're trying to do so through, one of the means is through this very deep meaning construction of gender. And they're telling us that nature is broken and that there are transgender people stuck in the wrong bodies, and we must address this. This has led to a huge level of disruption in our society that cannot be overemphasized. It is transformational to the way that they want. Now, they've got it, the linguistics around it, protected. So they've protected their assault on gender and sex by all these weaponized empathy. Okay? And they've weaponized empathy in many different ways. They've done it around race. That's part of the thing, is that they used to do it around, the Bolsheviks did it around class. Everything was class. And that's what they tried to do in India, and it didn't work. They tried to take over India with communism, and it just burnt out because there's just too many classes, and they weren't able, and it's too ingrained in the caste system, and supported by a religious power structure that needs that caste system to exist. So there was an instant battle with it. Here we didn't have a religious power system that needed a particular emphasis on gender and sex to exist in the main social discourse. what do they call that? The Overton window, right? But we need to discuss all of this as adults because this is at the core of the social order. And this is one of the ways in which the bug is getting at us by protected the discussion about it. You can't bitch about someone with purple hair, a beard thicker than mine, claiming to be female, right? And lifting weights, this kind of thing. You can't bitch because you're going against their identity, all of this intersectionality, all of this kind of stuff. It's all been compartmentalized. Now that compartment has to bust open, and we're busting it open in these, as the woo is overtaking the paradigm in all these other areas. This whole structure is going to break down probably fairly quickly, much quicker than it took to create it. So it's taken like 45 or 50 years, maybe longer really, to create this. It really goes back to the 60s. If you look at some of the psychiatric shit that they started putting in the 60s to convince the psychiatrist that they were gods, and that the psychiatrist had great insight into the fact that nature was broken and they could pick out who it was broken in. And so they did all these things to pump up the psychiatrist's understanding of their own art, and so on, their own science. They made it a science, but such that we would be here now. And that was a long, hard path, but it's really been ramping up since the 70s or so. And all different kinds of aspects of the social order were engineered in order that this might occur. Just as if you want to destroy the social order, you start introducing, fentanyl as a drug in vast quantities because it's easy and cheap to produce, and then you get everybody addicted, and then you can just come on in and clean up when you want to invade, because a lot of them will have self-terminated with addictions and trying to do their own transformational process with these kind of things. Also, by the way, just as an aside, I couldn't act as a conduit, but I know that there are people that are working with fentanyl addicts with mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, with good effect. In any event, because it disrupts this process and makes it, completes it, you get transformed by the psychedelic mushrooms into something you're not, and in the process you leave behind the old cording that drove you to try and transform yourself through the fentanyl. It just is a way of understanding this, right? Okay, so we find that transsexuals have been inculcated into our social order for a long time. Back ancient Rome, back before Rome, back Sumeria, way back, thousands of years. One of the first images of this is the Bahopmet, right? That goat god with the tits and the arms and stuff. That's a dual gender being. Now this shit arises, and the reason that it is pertinent is that I'll get rid of that, we don't need that anymore. All right, so I am of the opinion that if the mythos said that they hung Christ, or that they drowned him, that we would not use a rope and we would not use a pond as symbols for Christianity. We would still use the cross, okay? That's because the cross is part of our understanding of transformation. And it comes in, and it's way deep, there's all this symbology to it, but when you get into the cross, you get into this concept right here. And from here we get the idea of the broken cross, the swastika, but also that also has another point of origination, which is in the bending magnetic fields of the sun, because the sun's equator rotates faster and rotates slower than the poles, and the magnetic fields get twisted up. And looking from either pole, the sun actually has a swastika kind of an effect three-dimensionally as these magnetic fields wrap around it. So way back when, at some point, we could look at the sun with these magnetic filters that we now have today and see that effect occur. So that's, inherited knowledge from the previous civilization. But in this transformational process, which you have to acknowledge Christianity is all about transforming, right? Sinner to not sinner, sinner to saved, basically bad person to good person, Christ himself, which it's kind of, well, I won't go into that, but anyway, Christ himself being, transformed, beyond death, all of these kind of things, right? Live to dead to live again, right? And so the whole point of transformation, by the way, the whole point of using the cross is that going down any element of the cross in the part of the transformation, you come to the decision point. And that decision point is the nexus of the two paths that meet. And once you get into the cross and get into the path, you don't usually go back down the path that you came out of. The symbology in the cross is so tied into transformation that we use it in a lot of different languages as an aspect, as a symbol for the transformative process. Oh damn, another long one. Okay, and I got to get to cleaning. Okay, so anyway. So the reason that, just as another aside, the peace symbol is what's known as the broken cross. In the transformational initiation ethos and symbology, this is a no. Okay, you don't want to associate with any transformational process that is bifurcated, that doesn't offer you the three choices from your point of entry. You go three different ways, right? Continue on your path or divert left or right. And it gets into some pretty, all of the schools of disciplines of the transformational processes, lots of them center in on this, that once you go into the process, you come up to the point of the nexus, so you can continue as universe, that's the straightforward, as universe would have you, unaltered. But to the left or to the right is a point of alteration. And so, and you have that right to choose. And this is kind of like in, Star Wars, the dark side of the Force, the good side, etc. And you get to choose which branch, which way you allow the transformational process to change you. In this, you do not. Okay, so this is known as the broken cross, the peace symbol, what we think of as the peace symbol. All of these symbols are important, very, very, very important. And you can learn to read them, and so you get a real handle on what's going on. Now, one of the things that we've got here is the concept of the two pillars, all right? Joachim and Boaz. These are the two pillars out of Masonry. I don't like Masons. I appreciate the craft. I appreciate a lot of the knowledge, but I don't like the lodges. Lodges are all corrupt, and they have been for fucking ever. But the two pillars here are the two genders, right? Male and female. These two pillars in Masonic mythos, the whole goal is to join back into this unisexual being, not a hermaphrodite, but in a sense being so. All of these things go back to the idea of the Nummo, which I've done a lot of interviews on. The Nummo is this really ancient legend among humans that we once encountered a aquatic species that was 98% female, and any given female could become male should that be necessary for fertilization. And these were hominids, but that they were basically fish-based hominid, and had that characteristic to be able to have a fluid gender in all the understandings of that word. And so that goes back to the Nummo. The Masons have this in their core of their, as a lot of the secret societies do, is this idea that we're going to go back to this joining of male and female into a new being that is both. And it's in Masonic literature, it's referenced as the being with two spines, all of these different kinds of things. And there's all these symbols around it. And we're seeing it in this confusion of gender, of this dilution of gender roles and dilution of gender separations that's gone through the Western society as the other changes were underway anyway. The people that are trying to harmonize and transform the society in the direction they want, like in the broken cross, giving us only that one other option. Those individuals are trying to rise to the fore now and distort all of this. They use as their symbol for this process of transformation, they use the X, okay, or the cross. And so when they use it as an X, though, it goes to 10. Goes to the idea of 10 as in the Roman numeral 10. X, right? Roman numeral X. For the numeric that we think of as 10. That's their symbol for the fusion. That's their symbol for the domination of their being, of the Freemasonry idea. So this X you'll see in transformation, and it is deeply rooted symbology. You're going to see a lot of this kind of symbology and a lot of other competing symbology symbols pop up as we go through these next, well, dozens of years, probably, but very in sharp focus in these next few months as we see the Masonry symbols start coming out into the open, because they've got to bring them out in the open to try and cord people up around them for their manipulation and movement as they try and transform us. You'll also see competing uses of many of their symbols, as well as people that will be pointing out the symbols as they're appearing, because not everybody can understand and read symbols. I read a lot of languages, a lot more than I speak. It's sort of easy to read languages if you get into it. I won't now, but I also read in symbols because I've come across these things repeatedly, and it just kind of sticks with you. You know, oh, this cult used that symbol this way. You know, that sort of thing, right? So, over the next couple of months, it will be even stranger than it has been these past few months as we get into a period of time when symbols, the language of symbols, what's known as the language of the birds, will be coming out in a much more open fashion as our warfare comes out in a much more open fashion. And so it will be important to understand that some people are using some symbols ignorant of any other uses of those symbols. So many Christians don't think that that the cross is, they don't think that the cross equals X, which equals 10, and the 10 is another one of these merge things for the Masonic cadre, for the powers that be. But many Christians don't see the cross as being the X, but many of the occultists, not occultists, the powers that be and this kind of stuff, they know that that symbol is indeed that process. Now, so you're going to have to be, the point here is that you're going to have to be aware that there are all these competing transformational processes that are going on in humanity at this time, and that within those competing processes, they will be using many of the same symbols in entirely different ways, with hard stops on the symbology, all different kinds of stuff, right? Therefore, be aware that the symbol is not the thing. All right, so you've got to be careful about this, because the idea for the powers that be will be to cord people around symbols in order to move them, and symbols are very, very, very powerful. But if you're aware that people are speaking in symbology, then you can take appropriate action, and you can easily see things that will be developing and see who is using symbols which way, and that will identify players and opponents. And then everybody else is an NPC. So anyway, guys, I got to get to cleaning. It's more storm here. Watch out for the symbols, though. It's going to get really active over this next little bit of time. I think that was it. Wow. All right, symbols.